Welcome to the podcast Scattered, one person's search for the story behind human remains. My name is Yvonne Chorlin. I'm a physical anthropologist and archaeologist. In other words, I like dead people. In this podcast, I explore topics related to dead people, from searching for human remains in forensic contexts to mortuary practices in modern and archaeological contexts, and everything in between. I offer information, perspectives, and insights directly from the mouths of researchers, as well as experiences of people who work with remains. All of this aims to provide you with information on subjects that aren't really talked about, don't seem to be a priority, or they can be very misunderstood. I hope you enjoy. All right, so tell us who you are and where you're at.
So I'm Brad Clark. I teach in the Journalism and Broadcast Media Studies programs at Mount Royal University here in Calgary. And my research and my interests in the field really focus around ethics and representations of equity-deserving groups. And that's really my jam. I really enjoy learning about how media can improve the way they do things. I like the way ethics are evolving and seeing how we're becoming, I think, a little more sensitive to different aspects of our storytelling related to sources, related to audience, and that's what keeps me getting up every morning and coming into work.
Wow. That's a ball of wax and a half. How did you get to where you are now? Because I understand you worked at the CBC for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of take us on your journey.
Sure.
To how you got from, I don't know, being a journalist out in the field to doing that glamorous job, because obviously, it is, to where you are now.
Well, I can remember even being in a class and learning about journalism and thinking that this would be fun to teach someday.
Oh, really? Wow.
And that might have been like around 1985. I got my first job as a journalist, as a reporter with the St. Albert Gazette, just north of Edmonton in 1986. And then in 1989, I went back to do a master's. I was always quite interested in I think just understanding journalism at a deeper level, and so going back and doing a master's felt pretty natural. So I did that at the University of Cardiff in Wales, and that was a really interesting place to do that. I think the media then and now in Europe are a lot more outward looking. I find North American media quite inward looking, and there's lots of media there to take in. And so then I came back and I worked for CBC for a number of years, and I got to do a lot of really interesting work. I was a national reporter. I got to cover a lot of big stories. I got to do a fair bit of traveling. And but I was starting to get to a place where I was always excited about telling stories, but more and more it was just the big stories, not the, Brad, the Bank of Canada is announcing a new interest rate today. We want you to cover that.
Oh, come on. That is exciting. If you hold a mortgage, that's exciting news.
Yeah. Well, in those days, the Bank of Canada was holding interest rates pretty steady. There were a lot of live on-air reports of nothing changed today, which is never a great story arc for any kind of story, let alone a news story. I still kind of had this sideways glance out the corner of my eye for an opportunity to teach, and I saw a posting come up at Mount Royal, and so I applied and I got here, and I started teaching, and right away I became really keen in trying to find the vocabulary to talk about ethics and good journalism and good reporting. And part of that for me was starting to think more and more about accuracy and who are we hearing from? Whose voices are telling the stories? And it started to occur to me more and more that we were telling lots of stories about people from marginalized groups without a lot of input from them. And I can remember really kind of stumbling through trying to explain this to students and what strategies were to do it better. And eventually I as Mount Royal became a university, decided to go back to school again and do a doctorate. And so I made that the focus of my doctoral research. And so my dissertation was on national television news representations of racialized and Indigenous peoples. And that really kind of set me up for the work I've done in the last 10 years since then. So that's kind of how I've got to where I am now.
Wow, fabulous. So before we get any further, I wanted to explain why I've invited you onto a podcast about dead people. And for me, it seems obvious, but for a listener, maybe it's not. So when I worked at the Picton Farm investigation, it was high profile. There was a lot of media attention, and a lot of us had journalists come up to us after we left the premises, and they wouldn't even introduce themselves, and it was very abrupt, very direct, and I found it a little bit traumatic even. But on top of that, even though I wasn't reading any of the media, any of the newspapers, or watching the media on the investigation, I did hear that there were people, academics, that were commenting on the investigation that weren't involved in the investigation. And I found that very interesting. And I didn't quite understand why that happened. And so part of me inviting you, Brad, to the podcast is to discuss some of that, is why, might an academic feel it's okay to comment about something that they are not involved in. And, universities, academic institutions do promote that. Mm-hmm. They have it on their websites that these are the experts that we have at our institutions that are available for comment, regardless of whether or not they're involved in the situation. So I wanted to get, some insight on that from you, but also because the dead can't talk. Mm-hmm. And so representing them, I think, is an interesting, population to fit within that, the marginalized and the ethics of journalism. Sure. So that's why I wanted you on the podcast.
Sure.
And I thought you would be fantastic, considering your past experience and your research, to talk about that.
Yeah. So I think anytime anybody is asked to speak to the media on a subject, they have to be pretty upfront. They need to be transparent about what their background is, what they're bringing to the interview, and what they can speak to on a real level. What do they know about the situation to really offer something of value in the way of knowledge that falls within their range of experience and relates to whatever issues or themes or ideas that the interviewer is trying to pursue. And I think there has to be, maybe there isn't enough of this, but I think there needs to be, I think people need to be a lot more upfront about what they aren't able to answer. To say no to questions, no, I can't answer that. I have no insight. I don't have any experience in that area.
Well, can we just go back for a second? Sorry, because what is the purpose for a journalist to go and ask for a comment from somebody who isn't involved? Sorry, I'm not getting the connection on that.
So what I would guess is using the example of the investigation into Robert Pickton and that series of horrific crimes, that what journalists might be asking experts about, they may be asking about legal views of the legal process. How does the justice system work in this case? When the evidence might be hugely circumstantial, and what are the implications for the arguments that the prosecution has to make? How is the defense going to couch their case against the charges? So it kind of depends on what aspect of the event that the journalist is trying to get a handle on. Okay. It could be, you could talk to a forensic expert around how you try to, sift through a site like the farm to uncover evidence, what the approach is. Those are things that academics have real background and information about. If I can extend it to a different example,
absolutely.
We can't just talk to people who are facing end of life to talk about assisted dying, about the MAID legislation, for example. We need people to interpret the law, the implications of the law. So we may go to professors at the U of C Law School, for example, to make sense of the legislation. So lots of times what we're doing, or what journalists are doing when they reach out to experts, is to get a handle on the deeper aspects related to the story that are beyond the grasp of journalists, but also probably beyond the grasp of audiences as well. Okay. So that's
kind of contextual,
yeah,
providing a context, but also that deeper aspect
right.
as well. Okay,
that's right. But in the example of assisted dying, I think you'd be doing an audience a real disservice if you only talk to experts. If you don't talk
right.
to people who are facing end of life in a way that can be very painful, can be very undignified in some ways, and some people may not want it to end that way.
Right.
So to understand that, I think you need voices. You need more than just expert voices. Mm-hmm. You probably need more than voices of people who are affected by the legislation as well. Mm-hmm. And so now, where things can get ethical or unethical is when people decide to weigh in without really having the expertise
yes.
to make the sorts of pronouncements that they make.
Right. So I'm going to ask to take a step back, because journalism, I think, at least in my lifetime, has changed. And there's now perhaps a view, and it could just be my perspective, that I have trouble deciphering between the difference between journalism and, people just spouting their opinions on, they say they're from a media outlet of some sort, but what's the difference between, their opinion and actual journalism? So can you maybe give us a little bit of a history lesson, or tell us, what is the role of journalism? What do they teach you at journalism school that makes you a journalist?
Okay, we might
5
be
minutes
here for
or
a
less.
while. I think there's lots of ways to think of it. So journalism is a process of verification.
Okay.
So journalism is finding stuff out. So there's an aspect of investigation, of exposing facts and truth. It's a process of verification. Sometimes it's a process of interpretation as well. Sometimes journalists are there to interpret the implications of government policy, for example, or they're there to break down complex issues related to science, break them down into a way that people can understand. Why does a vaccine work a certain way? How has carbon in the atmosphere contributed to the planet heating up? So some of that stuff can be very jargony, but it's up to. But one of the things journalists do is find the common language that people use to understand that and express it in terms that people can relate to and say, oh, okay, now I get it.
So it's almost like doing a public service for translating difficult concepts that would
Sure.
likely impact the public, and the public probably should know about.
Yes, yeah. So
Yes?
that's
Okay.
that's that aspect of it. I mean, obviously, journalism plays a watchdog role in society, keeping an eye on people in power, holding power to account over the decisions they make, if they're in government or if they're running corporations that have impacts on people. So there's that aspect of it. I mean, even the Charter of Rights and Freedoms makes a lot of provisions for oversight of the judiciary and the justice system, so that we're ensuring people are getting fair access to justice, whether as accused or whether as potential victims in crime or legal disputes. So journalism does a lot of different things, and so that's what the intent is. When what's happened in the last 20 years with the growth of the internet and digital media and then social media is this incredible fracturing of sources of information. And I heard an expression at this conference I was at recently, the Narrative Journalism Conference in Boston at Boston University. And the comment was from an expert in information, disinformation, and misinformation. And she pointed out that knowledge is expensive, information is cheap. And
Oh, nice.
lots of times when you're dealing with stuff that you're not sure about the source, it's information. It's cheap. It's somebody posting something they've seen somewhere or heard somewhere and just putting it up. Knowledge, whether it's journalistic or academic or scientific, it costs. It has a cost associated with it. It's taken effort. It's involved people verifying, investigating, and being thoughtful about how to frame it and how to write about it so that people can see it and understand it. And so, how do you tell the difference between knowledge and information? I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to knowing the source. And, you quite rightly said, a lot of stuff comes from a source maybe you haven't heard of before. That's always a telltale sign. That's always a good reason to start to be skeptical. It's not to say that there may not be truth to what's there, but it is sort of the first red flag that this may not be as rigorously curated as you'd like. So and then if it looks like it may be a reliable source, then who are the voices that you see in the content? What sources of information have they brought in to bring this account together? Are they talking to people with direct knowledge? Are they talking to people who have an axe to grind related to the issue? Are they only talking to people with an axe to grind? So you can start to look for the perspectives that are included and excluded in the account, and you can start to think critically about the potential validity of the information and decide whether it's something you want to put much stock in or not.
Right. And I couldn't help but notice that what you just outlined was what you outlined in regards to what journalism does. They verify, they provide context, they do some, knowledge translation, regarding jargon and whatever. But yeah, if you do come across that piece of information that hasn't kind of gone through the filter of a journalist, then you have to go and be the journalist yourself and do that verification, the context, and figuring out how reliable is that information and is it actually knowledge?
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's very much the process. And with information being so ubiquitous, like not everything goes through the lens of journalism. Pre-digital media, pre-internet, for better or for worse, we had gatekeepers in journalism who really controlled the tap on what made it into the public discourse. What was or wasn't news was decided by usually powerful white men who were in positions of authority at news organizations all over the world, and so that brought up kind of a particular perspective to the news. But one of the things it also did was it did involve pushing information through kind of an ethical and legal lens. So things that were purely slanderous or libelous, they didn't see a lot of light on the pages of newspapers or in news broadcasts, or things that were just straight opinion or that were BS. There were ethical standards to verification, to representations of truth that prevented some stuff from making it into the public discourse through the news media.
So they provided the filters, but at the same time, they probably kept a lot of really good stuff out because they were, the patriarchal white guy syndrome. Yeah.
Yeah, very much the patriarchal settler view of the world that, and that's been one of the beauties of social media is that it has allowed for underrepresented voices to circumvent the traditional gatekeepers. So you get movements that get traction, like Idle No More, like Black Lives Matter, that may not have got the same kind of traction in the past because of social media. Social media allowed them to circumvent the gatekeepers. The other side of that is it also allows the far-right nutcases to circumvent the gatekeepers too. So
if you remove the filters on one, you remove the filters on it all.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, yeah. And what really brought, I guess, home for me the role of journalism, at least how it used to be, was when I watched Spotlight about the Boston Globe and exposing the the sexual abuse and assaults in the 80s, 90s, and in Boston in regards to the Catholic Church. And just watching the movie and seeing how those journalists dug and investigated and brought that case to light. And I thought, oh, that's what journalism is. That's their role. Versus something like Ancient Apocalypse. Mm-hmm. And Graham Hancock says that he's an investigative journalist. And I'm like, really? Because that's not what I saw in Spotlight.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting contrast.
Yeah. The term investigative journalist is so overused. Like, it should really be licensed.
Some sort of trademark that you have to apply for.
Exactly. Because, the people who put out the 10,000 Mules documentary related to conspiracy theories around the stolen election in 2020 and the Trump conspiracy that ballots were stuffed, for example, those people would describe themselves as investigative journalists as well. And work like that is really easy to fact check and verify, and people have. And people who actually could call themselves investigative journalists. So that's the problem. So sometimes people are investigative journalists, and then sometimes people are investigative journalists with air quotes.
But again, I think it goes back to kind of your checklist that you say that provided before about what journalism provides, the verification, the context, the diversity of voice, and ensuring that it isn't just information, it actually is knowledge. But now we have to go through that check with, the air quotes, investigative journalists to actually ensure that they are actually investigative journalists or not.
Yeah.
And whether or not to believe them.
Yeah. Another way to assess it, I guess I mentioned this earlier, but I'm thinking specifically of the air quote investigative journalist Netflix series. What was it called?
Ancient Apocalypse.
Ancient Apocalypse. Like, I haven't looked at that at all, but
it's a fun story.
Sure.
If you want to blow 8 hours and just be along for the ride, watch it.
Yeah.
But in terms of actual archaeology and depth, not so much.
Yeah. What I would look at critically in watching that series is, who are the voices? Who are we talking to? And what are the voices that are left out? Yeah. And I think I haven't seen the series, but I bet if you do that, you come to understand the perspectives that aren't there. Right. It reminds me a little bit. When I was a kid, I was really, really fascinated by aliens, and there was a writer who came out with a book, and then it became a documentary. It was something about the gods. The sequel is called
Chariot of the Gods.
Chariot of the Gods, and then there's a sequel called Gold of the Gods. And it was sort of looking, taking things that seemed like they were difficult stories to explain, like the pyramids or the Nazca lines in Peru, and so. What's the only conclusion you can come to? It must have been aliens. That's kind of what comes to mind to me when I see that. And it's, I don't know what the logical terminology is, but the idea that sometimes the simplest argument is the right one, like that really plays out a lot of times, and especially in a world where conspiracy theories are so prevalent these days.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to get under the psychology of all that. I'm sure it's there, but it was very interesting because both programs were on Netflix.
Yeah.
And so they're demonstrating the continuum of, I guess, accuracy of information. And even though Spotlight was a movie and it was fictionalized, I mean, they touted it, fiction, whereas the Ancient Apocalypse was advertised as a docuseries, as truth. And I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one of the troubles with the world today
Just one.
is the way people take the trappings of journalism, what Stuart Hall might call the professional code related to journalism, and use that as a way to add credibility to the messaging that they're putting out. So you call, kind of a half-assed archaeological series a docu-series. You see it in branded content that is made to look like news articles. They come with headlines. They come with little quote box with, they may include a little infographic in it to hit the key points. I did some research for a book we did called The Blue Storm, The Rise and Fall of Jason Kenney, and I wrote about the Canadian Energy Centre known as the Energy War Room. And if you go to their website, it has very much the trappings of journalism, headlines and subheads and decks. They have a section called Matter of Fact where they fact check, and I'm using air quotes, usually media accounts related to the energy industry that they don't agree with. And we know that a lot of the messaging is very one-sided. The stories and articles that are put out by the Energy War Room, which was a campaign promise of the UCP to challenge what it referred to as the myths and untruths that people were saying about the oil and gas industry. But that's a whole other side. But the point is that they try to give their views additional credence by taking on the trappings of journalism. So there's lots of stuff out there that's made to look and sound like journalism that actually isn't. And that's just one more thing that you need media literacy to kind of address.
Yeah, that selective reporting, I think, is very interesting, especially because I'm, working my way through another one of your books, journalism's
Racial Reckoning.
Yeah, that one, Racial Reckoning, and just how, especially marginalized voices have been excluded, and that is, very selective about what information you choose to report on, choose to investigate. And could also be said about the dead because they can't speak for themselves. So, like you just illustrated with the assisted dying, you can't just talk with the experts and you can't just talk with the people that it affects. You need the whole context, the whole picture. And it isn't about being selective in what makes the best story because it's all about shock and awe and, sex sells and what have you. You really do have to look at all sides. And I think it's a matter of integrity that perhaps has been lost.
Yeah, I think there's that. I think also if you look at in high profile stories who the people are who constitute the dead, they're often people who have been invisible.
Absolutely.
They're people who have not had the opportunity to be heard from and continue not to be heard from. Another clear example and very much related to Picton is missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
Absolutely, yeah.
And other people are trying to tell their stories and I think have done quite a remarkable job. But but that's where journalism needs to be better, is to tell those stories before death, like tell those stories when something can be done to keep the people alive.
Right. Yeah, and I know this comes up a lot with investigations, officers after the fact, detectives after the fact, saying that, you know what, if this had happened to somebody who was white or in, an upper class neighborhood, there would have been no question. They would have got on the investigation. Things would have been done right away. But because, it was marginalized, Indigenous, Black, something, a woman, they weren't investigated, or they weren't investigated thoroughly, promptly. I hear that all the time. And that Murder in Boston podcast is exactly that.
Yeah. Another U.S. example that I've shared with my students is when a young woman hiking a couple of years ago, I think her name was Gabby Petito, went missing. She went missing, I think it was in Arizona or one of the western states. And it was just this flurry of media coverage, and it very much focused on her boyfriend very, very quickly. And people in the state, First Nations people in the state started saying, excuse me, we've had dozens of women go missing, and you've never reported on it. Young, pretty 18-year-old white girl goes missing, and suddenly you focus all this attention on state efforts to find somebody, and so it's very much the case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that double standard.
Yeah, it's tragic, but I'm glad that it's coming to awareness.
Yeah.
For better or for worse, it's taken as long as it has to get here. But we're gaining awareness, and it's now, what are we going to do about that awareness? How can we move forward in a constructive and a productive manner?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, tough stuff all around. And it's probably one of the reasons why I started this podcast, is that talking about death is a taboo, and talking about the hard stuff is hard.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean we shouldn't talk about it. If anything, we should, because it's hard, we should talk about it. It's probably hard for a reason.
Yeah.
And we're just avoiding it to no one's benefit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So where are you going to go next in your research?
I'm working on a proposal with a colleague for a book that is going to look at disinformation as it relates to marginalized groups and who often find themselves the focus of disinformation. If we think about what we've seen with 2S LGBTQI plus in the last few years, even in Alberta, the issues around transgender youth. There's been a lot of really significant misinformation about that. There was a time when people who wanted to take a run at queer people would brand them as pedophiles, and now they don't use that language anymore for fear of being sued for libel. So now the term is groomer.
Really?
So this is some of the issues that we're starting to see, and the media don't always do a terrific job of countering some of that narrative. There's a recent study that came out just like in the last couple of weeks, looking at the New York Times coverage of transgender issues in the U.S. and some ridiculously low percentage of the stories included transgender voices in the article. It should be 100%. And I can't remember what the proviso was, but in one instance it was as low as 16% included transgender voices. So, that's just sort of one aspect of it. But that's where I'm going next. One of the things, like personally, that I have such a tough time with, and it's the journalist in me, is like when somebody says something that's incorrect, that's factually wrong, like my body is like racked with energy to correct them, and that's not always appropriate. But it like the existence of either lies or falsehoods or just information that's invalid or incorrect, like it just gets on my very last nerve in a way that it's just the very core of my existence. And so I think that's kind of what got me on looking at EDI in media in the first place. And now when we live in a world where misinformation and disinformation are so prominent, I want to kind of bring the two together. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't envy you at the moment because you're probably in a constant state of cringe and because of all the misinformation and lies out there.
Yeah, I'm prone to be listening to podcasts and start yelling as I'm running or that's ridiculous.
That's wrong.
You can't say that.
So let's put on our positive thinking cap, if there is one. Where do you see journalism in, maybe, let's just do 10 years? Is it going to get better? Because you said you had some positive
Sure.
coming out of the conference in Boston.
Yes.
You weren't expecting that?
I guess I wasn't expecting as much of it, but yeah, I know I felt like people were really celebrating journalism in a way that I don't feel happens very often with journalism. Especially in Canada, we've been through so many layoffs, and it just seems like it's been kind of a dark, ugly picture of the future of journalism. Lots of great students who are really engaged and keen to make a difference coming into the program. So that part has always kind of given me some hope. But I think for me what the conference did was just remind me of how important the role of journalism is, and the place for it, and the fact that people who are doing it are coming from the right place. They're trying to do good. They're trying to address some of the issues that we've been talking about, to correct the narrative, to bring in more voices, to tell better stories. And that's the other thing. If we tell stories better, if we can engage with audiences with important issues, maybe that can motivate more change as well. Part of the conference was very much focused on narrative journalism, and narrative has been shown to be a really powerful tool in not just pushing out misinformation and disinformation, but in combating it as well. So if we can tell stories in a way that are fair and accurate and engaging, maybe that's a way forward to address some of the issues we're facing with conspiracy theories and the rejection of science and expertise sometimes as well. So I guess 10 years out, I would love to see that kind of positivity gain some momentum and drive drive young journalists to continue to try and pursue the craft and get better at it. And I do see that. And there was a few years ago, I didn't find journalism students necessarily looking to practice journalism. And I'm seeing that less and less. I'm seeing students come into the program because they want to be journalists, because they want to tell stories, because they want to hold power to account and make a difference. And so I hope that trajectory continues, kind of an upward trend. And the other part of it is, and we haven't talked about this at all, it just related to the business model and sustainability. And I'm hoping that people start to recognize the importance of paying for journalism. Mm. There was a time in the 1950s and 1960s when 95% of Canadian households subscribed to at least one newspaper. So they were paying for news all the time. And now, and I've had people say this to me, is like, why should I pay for a subscription? Information is free. Well, remember, information is free. Knowledge costs money.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that more people will come to realize that. People pay for books. People pay to stream movies. Why should my work as a journalist not be paid for? Why does it not have value?
I think that's just it. You know, what is the value? And that's part of the reason why I wanted to come on and get you on here is to understand the value of journalism, because it seems like either like we've lost the sense of the value, or it has been devalued in some way, shape, or form. And so I wanted to get your insights on that. And, it sounds like journalism still very much does have value. We just don't perhaps recognize it, in the slew of cheap or free information.
Yeah.
What is the value of knowledge? And whoever provides that knowledge or cultivates it, or...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is journalism has been under attack as a way to deflect from responsibility for a whole host of things. So, when any reporting is referred to as fake news by the leader of the free world, people start to listen to that as well. So we've been up against that.
It's hard to know who to believe anymore.
Believe me.
I will, Brad. I will. All right. Well, I think we're going to end there, because this is fabulous. Thank you very much. Thank you for your insights. And if people want to reach out to you, I hope you be welcoming to them.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a total pleasure. Thanks so much.
I hope you've enjoyed listening to this episode. Please leave a rating or review and share this episode and podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues.